out here. What I do, Purdue likes me to report numbers, so I'm gonna count however many people are here and multiply that by 28. That's how many. Because each of you just go and tell 2 people what you learned, and those 2 people tell 2 people, and before you know it, I've got 100,000 people. But I think we've got a couple of really good guests here today who can answer a lot of the questions that you have. And I know, man, there's a lot of questions, right? Like, I don't know, I didn't know anything about this until maybe 5 weeks ago. Somebody mentioned it to me, and my first reaction was, WTF, you know, like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, I was thinking, is this Dr. Evil? That kind of thing? And that's what I imagined, Dr. Evil. This is some plot. But, you know, I kind of learned a little bit more about it, and I did calm down a little bit. I learned a little bit more about it, so it's good to learn more about it. But I guess one of the speakers that we have today is Dr. Doug Schmidt from Purdue Department of Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Sciences. And Doug, I feel like it's a good thing that you were recommended to me, because I look at your biography and it looks like you're the guy to answer this type of questions. Like, your interests, the things that you study, are right in line with this type of work. You're not just, you know, somebody with a rock collection that I call that you come in here and talk about this.
I do have a rock.
So Doug's going to be able to answer some of our, like, carbon sequestration, like the physical science part of it, and maybe some of the environmental aspects of it, the water quality kind of stuff that we have questions about. And at some point, I got a question for Doug. I'm trying to figure out how much CO2 we could put under Benton County. I kind of have an idea of how thick that layer is, and I'm trying to get an idea of just how many metric tons of CO2 we can put down there, because that's important for, you know, if the state of Indiana is getting paid so much per metric ton, they're taking in $40,000 an acre, and they're offering us $100 an acre just for the landowners. That doesn't seem right. And it's, if they're taking in that money, I'd like to make sure that I'm asking what's in it for me. You know, I don't have any land much, but I do have a well, and I got 4 people drinking out of that well, and you know, I plan on living here until I die, so I'm kind of concerned about long-term effects of this. But Doug can talk about those kind of things, and then after him we'll have Jeff Cummins from the Indiana Farm Bureau. I say after him, but we'll probably mix in somewhat. But Jeff Cummins from Indiana Farm Bureau, he's I'm going to call you their policy director. And I know I've seen your name in articles, in news releases about this topic, carbon sequestration. So again, Jeff isn't just somebody who has been to the State House a couple times like me and coming in here to talk to you about this. He's got some experience with this. He's been involved in it for quite some time now. So I think we've got 2 really good experts to talk today. Are you guys up and running on the record yet?
Yeah, go ahead and start.
Yeah, so I guess, you know, the same disclaimer that we had at the courthouse is that, you know, this is the Farm Bureau guy and the Purdue guy, but BP representatives aren't in here today, so I'm not with BP, these guys aren't with BP, so I know, make sure not to meet me out in the parking lot and roll me after the meeting.
Why isn't BP?
Why aren't they here?
I don't know that it's time yet. I mean, yeah, let's get the information, let's, you know, get everybody up to speed, and then maybe we can get their guys in here to answer some questions. I mean, one question is, why didn't you guys be up front about this, you know, like,
Yes.
and maybe that's by plan, you know, that we kind of find out a little bit at a time and try to make sense of it, and we take care of a lot of what they should have taken care of ourselves, you know, so, but I don't know. But I'm gonna guess that it's not just somebody dropping the ball. I'm gonna guess that it's by design. It's kind of working out this way.
Yeah.
So Doug,
Yeah, okay.
are you ready?
Yeah.
You got, I don't know where you're most comfortable talking. If you just want to walk out here, we got a lectern here.
No, I'll just walk
Okay.
around if that's okay.
All right, that's all good. Thanks, Doug.
Yeah. So John asked me about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and I came and talked to the county councilor just to give him a feel for this carbon sequestration is, right? And so it's something that's been, in Illinois, it's a big thing. Illinois is probably going to make a big industry out of it because essentially the same rocks that are standing beneath us here, they're going to use for carbon sequestration. And my background is, I actually grew up on a farm in southern Alberta, and but I'm a geophysicist and study things like seismic and rock properties. And I've been involved with projects before I came to Purdue in 2018, but in Saskatchewan, there's quite a deep project sequestering carbon from a coal-fired power plant. And another one was, it wasn't sequestration per se, but putting carbon in the ground for enhanced oil recovery. Okay, so that's done a lot, right? A lot of carbon goes in the ground to help keep pressures up, and actually it helps mobilize oil. And so I studied that from rock properties perspective and from a seismic perspective. Okay, and we're hoping to be involved with a project in Illinois coming up in Gibson, right? There's a lot of activity over the border. But let me talk a little bit about what this is, and if you have a question, just yell at me, okay? Or we can talk later, whatever. But I'll try and give you what the idea is and what the science is. I'm not a legal guy or anything. I can't address any of those questions or land, but I can try and give you a feel for what they want to do. And so the idea is, BP has that huge refinery, one of the biggest in the world, up there by Lake Michigan, right? They want to produce a lot of hydrogen, and a lot of reasons for that, right? The steel mill's right there. If you can start making steel with hydrogen instead of coal, everybody wants to pay way more for that steel, right? There's a lot of reasons, okay? So they want to make hydrogen. You need methane to do that, natural gas, right? And so it produces a lot of CO2 when you do that. So most of the hydrogen produced on Earth by humans is done by, it's called reforming methane. And basically breaking methane apart at high temperature. But that produces a lot of CO2. And so if they want to, suppose U.S. Steel wanted to sell steel that was green, right, then if you're releasing a lot of CO2 to make that, it makes no sense, right? Right, in terms of that. So the idea is to get rid of the CO2 permanently, right? And so this has been going on for 20 years. There's a lot of projects around the world been going, and particularly in Alberta, where I came from, and Saskatchewan, there's some of the leaders there. Illinois is a leader. And the idea is basically you strip out the CO2, say from a coal-fired power plant or from a refinery, right? The carbon dioxide, put it in a pipeline, compress it, and then you stick it quite deep down into the earth. And so there aren't caverns down there, but there's here, right? What they're sticking it into, putting it into, is they're called saline aquifers, right? So if we go down a few thousand feet beneath our feet, beneath us here, there's a great big, and I'll talk more about it, right? But there's a great big, thick layer of sandstone, and sandstone is quite porous, right? So maybe 25% of that sandstone is actually just holes, right? And right now those holes are filled with really salty water, okay? Brines, much, much higher salt content. This is just natural in sedimentary basins like we're in here. You go deeper and the rocks are going to be filled with brines, which are, 10, 20 times as salty or more than the seawater, right? So one thing is you could maybe mine that for lithium now, that's another story, but so the idea is you stick the CO2, pipeline it, compress it, send it down into these porous aquifers, these rocks. And there's basically, I don't know how many tons, John, I don't even want to say because I'll get myself in trouble, but it's going to be millions of tons. Okay, I'm not going to go any further because you have to do calculations. It's not so straightforward, right? It depends what the rocks are doing and all of that, how much they can put in. Right, so, you know, typically these projects are millions of tons of CO2 that's gonna be put in. But under Benton County, like this is a cartoon I took off the internet, and the idea is we go down here, right, as far as we can. Beneath those rocks are really old rocks. They're igneous and metamorphic rocks. They have no pore space in them. Okay, you can't put anything into them. And you basically pump CO2 down there. Okay, and it's in a special, you know, a phase, right? A certain kind of a gaseous phase that it goes in. And then, well, I'll talk about, so under Benton County, right, there hasn't been that much drilling, right? There wasn't a lot of petroleum exploration like in other places where there were boreholes all over the place. But there have been a few, and you know what's happened in nearby counties, you know what's happened in Illinois, close by. And so, like, this is the brines, right, how salty they are in terms of, so drinking water is, you know, 300 to 500 parts per million of solids, total dissolved solids, and those brines are 60,000 to 100,000, right? So you can't use that water for anything, okay? And it's also quite deep beneath us. And so there's a lot of things you want to worry about when you're doing this, right? Because like John said, right, I don't know if the state's getting money for this, right? And it starts to leak out, then that becomes a problem, right? I mean, even financially, right? You want that stuff down there. And so I'll try and talk about what will probably be happening to try and ensure that as much as possible. So this is, what this is it's called the Mount Simon Sandstone. And it's about 500 million years old, and it's really porous. This is a microscope picture, okay, of what that sandstone looks like. You see all these little holes in there? That's filled with brine right now, and the CO2 can go into those holes. It's like soil, right? Except that it's rock. It's been compacted and everything's welded together, all the grains, right? Or beach sand. Actually, it's beach sand that's been welded together, essentially. And fluids can flow through it, right? Also, otherwise it's, you know, they're not going to put it there if the fluids can't flow, because you got to inject it. And the water has to move around. In Benton County here, it's fairly deep, 2,500 feet to the top of that layer. Okay, 2,500 feet to 3,500 feet, kind of decreasing as getting deeper and deeper as we go across the county. This is kind of a cross section of the whole Illinois basin. We're in the Illinois basin. And this would be the Mount Simon Sandstone at the very bottom. And above it, it's quite thick. That's another reason. 2,000 feet thick. So think of this sandstone layer, you know, as old beaches or desert sands or whatever it was. I don't know the geology of it that well myself, but it's there and it's quite thick. 2,000 feet of that porous rock. So think of the volumes of, you know, if this is 25%, and you got something that's 2,000 feet thick, and it basically goes for hundreds of miles, you can stuff a lot of things into that pore space, okay? Yeah, so it's a huge volume, right, of potential pore space. So on top of that, then, right, and so that's why this is popular to come here, because of the rocks down there are very porous, really thick, and they're far from the surface. And so another thing that you look for in these projects is you don't want it, you want to put it down there, you want it to sit forever, and it'll react and it turns into minerals like calcite. Okay, so then it's completely locked away, right? But that takes time. You don't want that to leak out, right? And so you look for places that have really impermeable rocks that nothing can get through them. So like shales, right? They were old muds, right? And they got compressed and they become very impermeable rocks, okay? And so this is an example of what that rock looks like. That's a quarter, right? This is from a core in Illinois, not too far away, of what that Eau Claire shale looks like, okay? and it's very impermeable, and it's quite thick too. So that's the first kind of boundary, right? You've got a barrier here, you put it into here, the gas, right? And this is supposed to, you know, keep it there, right? So, I mean, those brines have been there for millions of years, right? They haven't gone anywhere, right? You can, oil and gas can be in those things, and those shales keep them for millions of years. So, hundreds of millions of years. And then we have other ones as we go up through here, which are also impermeable. So the idea is you keep it away from the surface as absolutely much as possible, so there's minimize the risk that it's going to leak up to ground level. So I think the risks that it's going to hit any groundwater are probably going to be, unless there's some other technical problems, right, that I'll talk about, are probably going to be low just from the geology itself. Okay, so, and then what happens to it? You put it down here, here's a cartoon. Okay, here would be like the Mount Simon sandstone. Here would be this Eau Claire shale, right, the impermeable, traps it. And you put CO2 in, you get a CO2 plume. You keep pumping CO2 in, it migrates away over a broad area, okay? And it does other things. You're going to have a zone that's going to be, you know, it's pushed the brine away, and it's going to be that gas. From my perspective as a geophysicist, that's something we can actually detect from the surface, and that's what I want to talk about, some of the things that they're probably going to be doing for monitoring. But then the idea, I'm not going to go into all the details here, you trap it different ways. And the idea is it gets in there and it gets, eventually becomes a mineral, calcite, okay? And just part of the rock. And so that's the main idea, you know, in the long-term scheme, hundreds or thousands of years. Yeah.
So if you're drilling through that impermeable shell,
Right.
aren't you making points of
Absolutely, right, and that's
how many holes down there? That's a
well, it's probably not these. These are going to be done to a very high level, right, and tested and everything. It's if there's old boreholes that were drilled early in the last century or something, or even into the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the practices might not have been as good. Probably none of them are going down that deep, right? So we're probably pretty safe in Benton County. But that would be a certain risk, right? That borehole becomes a possible transit for stuff in the long term.
well, even the borehole where the pipe goes down.
Oh, yeah, well then, if, yeah, that's there, but they're putting pressure on there and pushing it down, right? So, yeah, I think, say 25, 30 years, when the project reached its completion, then they'd basically seal that off with cement or whatever, right? Yeah. So it would be sealed. That would be the idea. Yeah, because you don't want that coming back up for sure. So that's just ways that you can get it. There's some other things I'll talk about though where, you know, we are concerned. So what's probably going to happen, and I think this is what John was talking about, was seismic and people wanting to carry out seismic surveys, right? So there'll be different aspects of the infrastructure associated with this. So one of them is going to be, they want to carry out seismic surveys. And what that is you basically lay out receivers, little geophones on the surface, thousands of them actually, right? Today, and you have some kind of seismic source. It'll probably be a vibrator truck. Maybe they could use dynamite. I have no idea what their plans are. Okay, but
They're here.
Huh?
They're here doing this now.
Oh, they are.
It's a truck that vibrates.
Okay, vibrator trucks then. Right, they're the least. You know, they don't cause that much damage really, right? And so you got the seismic waves come down. You have different layers in the earth, and they have different physical properties. It's just like you can hear a tiny echo in this room, right? So it's the exact same thing. We're getting echoes off those rocks because of the changes. You know, the air to the wall is a change in the material, and it echoes. And so we do that same thing with different kind of rock types. And they come up, you pick them up, and all that data, and then you basically stick it in a computer. It's a process, right? It's a huge, vast amounts of data, huge amounts of data. Probably a good chunk of the planet's computer time goes to making geophysical images. And you end up with something like this, okay? And what this, you probably haven't seen anything like this, but it's like you've got a 3D volume. I don't know, they could be doing just 2D profiles, which I'm not sure what they're doing, right? Or you could, if you collect, and maybe some of the people here could tell me what they're actually doing, but if they're putting geophones out over an area, then they're probably making a volume of what the Earth looks like. And it's kind of, so you can study that, and it tells you what the structure in the subsurface looks like, okay? And so you can see where, I don't know if you see these lines, right? That would be, that's where you have a contact between two rock types. And so you can actually track that, right, in the seismic. And importantly, right, what they'll be looking for initially is, are there any breaks in this or any faults? Okay, because that's what you don't want. If there's a fault, a break in those formations, say all the way down, then one problem is that becomes a potential route for fluids to escape, like the CO2 to escape or to move along that break in the rock types, right? So that's one thing I'm sure that they're doing. They're going to do an assessment. Oh yeah, sure.
That's a good graphic for you to show us how deep or at what level is the underground aquifers that we get our water from.
Well, they'd be, well, this is actually marine, but you know, so I think it's like 500 feet, right? And then I'm not a groundwater person myself, right? But I think, you know, like in Alberta, you're not allowed to do anything in the upper 300 or 400 meters, you know, 500 feet or something, right? To protect groundwater, right? Yeah. So, and then you start to get below that, and the groundwater quality, you can get into the bedrock, and that groundwater quality will be great, get with more salts and that. So, usually, okay, but that's kind of what they're doing with the seismic now is trying to make images. I'm guessing that they're also trying to make an evaluation where's going to be the safest place to put that, right? They want to avoid faults like crazy, okay? Not only for the fact that they could leak, but they're a little bit worried that if you could get small earthquakes or something like that, right? So they want to avoid that, yeah, like crazy. So I know over in the border, there was a case, I went to a meeting a few weeks ago. Oh, sorry, yeah.
What is the percentage accuracy with these testing?
That's a hard, you can, so I guess I put in terms of what you can see, right? How big a thing you can see, right, with it, right? And so, of course, it's not like we're looking. So it depends how deep you are, you know, so it becomes on, and it depends how, just a lot of variables, right? How you've collected the data, how you put it into the computer and processed it, how much time and care you spent with that. So, you know, we're probably looking at tens of meters when you get way down there, right? In terms of an object you could actually see, say, right? Yeah. So that would be probably the best way to say it. Just how big a thing could you actually detect? Okay, right? So for the accuracy. Okay, so where was I? Yeah, so just, okay, to do that first, and I'm sure, I mean, this is what I would do if I had a few $1 billion, okay? I'd go and I'd survey the area, make sure, you know the geology as much as I can from seismic. I'd probably drill some exploratory wells here and there, just so that I really calibrate the seismic data, right? And I know what the rocks are. In fact, I know how they'll take fluids, how permeable they are, all of these things they're going to want to do. So I'm sure there's going to be some exploratory drilling following that. Then there'll probably be repeated surveys. If they get an area they decide they want to start to inject, right? There'll probably be repeated surveys over that area, say every 2 or 3 years or whatever, right? And the purpose is that we can actually track the motion of that CO2 from seismic methods. You know, you change the rock, basically you change the echoes a lot by putting a gas versus a liquid, okay? And so you can actually detect that with seismic. And so that's what they're my guess is what the plan would be. So there's another aspect to seismic. This is called active source seismic. And as part of the monitoring, I'm sure they're gonna leave, oh, and this is a vibrator truck, I guess some of you have seen them, right? This is a modern recording device. It just sits out there and it listens to the ground vibrations and picks them up, and then you download them into a computer later, right? So it used to be that everything was on wires, but today I don't know what they're doing, but they're probably using these little things, and the guys are running around and planting them in the ground, right?
Yeah, they're little capsules, about 6 inches. They look like
that. Yeah, they're called nodes. They're called nodes. Yeah.
Yeah, they look different.
Yeah, well, there's different brands, yeah. Yeah. So, so there's another aspect to this, is they'll probably have things like this, or more sensitive ones, permanently in place around the area too, because as you're injecting, right, they want to listen for things like microseisms or that could be produced, okay? Just as lowering the risk analysis, it helps to see where the CO2 is going, and like I said, you don't want to induce earthquakes, right, from this, right? And so far, there hasn't been any big earthquakes induced by CO2 injection anywhere yet, okay? So, in fact, I did a project, and we didn't see anything, right, which was I was a little bit disappointed. Because we're just looking for tiny little crackles, right, in the rock that you'd never ever feel. Over the border in Gator, right, where there's the ethanol plant, they've injected about 1 million tons. It was one of the big first experiments, and they could see things crackling down there. They could see the motion, right, but there was nothing ever felt at the surface. It's just you're changing the conditions in the earth. That isn't to say that you couldn't have a big earthquake, right? But the risk here is probably small, right? Yeah. So, but that would be put in. When they drill those holes, they'll be doing different kinds of studies to understand the forces in the earth, too, because, you want to know what those are, because those are important for possibly causing these tiny earthquakes. So that is a risk, but certainly they're going to be, I'm sure, right, that part of their program will be leaving more permanent kinds of seismometers out that are just recorded all the time, and somebody in some office somewhere is going to be watching that continuously, and if anything starts to happen, then, so that'll be, I imagine, what's happening in terms of seismic. There'll be active source with vibrators.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
so let's say that you do all this and you've got your little monitors out. What are you gonna do if you actually caused a problem? You're just gonna sit there and monitor it and say, look what happened,
Well,
aren't you?
that's one thing, but yeah, but if you start to see a problem, right, then you could say, shut off the, and so, like in Alberta in hydraulic fracturing, where there has been some earthquakes that my group has looked at, right, they put in what are called stoplight kind of protocols. So, because they know when they're hydraulically fracturing, they're actually breaking the rock, so they know they're gonna get, right, but then if they get ones that are over a certain size, they basically stop doing anything, they have to shut down, right? So I'm sure that there'll be these kind of stoplight, or traffic lights or kind of protocols in place, right, yeah, for that, yeah.
People in Benton County actually have a choice in this matter, or is it
Well, I don't actually, I just, yeah, I don't know, I don't know, right?
Then what's the point of the meeting if you don't know if we have a choice?
Well, I'm a scientist, you need a lawyer or a politician or something to answer that. Yeah. I can't, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to give you technical facts, right, yeah.
That, like the high salt water that they're
Oh,
going.
sorry, yeah.
The salt water that they're going to.
Yeah.
Into, what happens to it? What does it?
So
what does it
basically,
do? Like,
the pressure goes up down there and it starts to migrate away.
I mean, where to?
Well, just within that layer still. Yeah. So it's
So
continuing.
they're both gonna be in there.
Yeah, they'll both be in there, the pressure will go up, right, a little bit, right, as they inject the CO2, the pressure's gonna go up. That pushes the water away and it flows through that porous rock, I guess.
If those spores are filled, where does it go?
Well, it just, the pressure goes up, right? So the pressure over a region goes up, so you inject the CO2, it's at higher pressure. And so it's all fluid, so it can move, and it's compressible a bit, right? And so basically it pushes it away. So, it
If
just,
the bucket of water is full, and it's full, and then you put more in it, what happens to that?
yeah, no, when we're at those pressures and that, the fluid is actually compressible enough too, right? So you're changing the volume of the fluid a little bit, right? Yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, so it's moving away, and it's getting denser, right, a little bit because of the pressure.
So it's like blowing up a balloon until it pops.
Yeah, yeah, it kind of, yeah. So, oh boy, okay, here's what we were.
One, could you repeat the questions over the front, because we can't hear.
Oh, he just wondered, basically where the fluid go, right? Or, yeah.
The high salt content.
Yeah, where's the high salt water go when you inject that? And so basically it gets pushed away, it gets denser a little bit, right? And because of the higher fluid pressures. And so it's flowing away from that site too.
So in there, they said that, like they're gonna pick this land that they're gonna do it, but it's gonna stop at this landmark, say a highway or whatever. How did they say?
No, no, so I don't think they can say that, right?
I know.
Yeah. So there's gonna be, maybe if, you got a huge tract of land and you put it in the middle, right? But they would have to, and that's not easy to answer because it depends on the rock properties and how much they put in and all of that, right? But so you get basically this plume of the CO2, right, that starts, and then you get the water around that's going to be pressurized a little bit, and it's all going to be flowing. So where it flows and how far, they'd have to model that, and it's not so easy to answer.
Early on in your presentation, you just had a side comment about, say, you could mine that for lithium.
Yeah.
Okay, if you tie this up for this, and I'm not saying that I'm for that even or whatever, but they tie you up so you can't do other things, and the United States might need the lithium a whole lot more than we need this.
Yeah, I don't know that this is good for lithium, but the other places, right, they've been using these salty waters
Or,
to,
just sell there's oil under there. Can you do both things, or is that the end?
Yeah, they're in different layers, right? So they don't want to hit any. I know there probably is going to be some natural oil in there. I don't know that any of it has been economic because nobody's really.
And we don't know now, but
Yeah.
they're trying to set.
So they'll drill other holes, right? If they find oil, then they'll probably stop. But the thing is, the oil is probably going to be in these higher layers, right? As far as I don't think there's any oil. I don't know for sure, right? But at least say in Decatur and in this layer, it's just basically salty water, as far as I know, right on the basin. But there is certainly oil, within other layers. You go further south in Illinois and Indiana, and upper,
So what's different about Benton County than Whitey refinery is?
I think it was basically you got a big chunk of this sandstone that's 2,000 feet thick. That's what I'm guessing, right? And it's relatively close to BP's refinery, I'm sure, right? So that's just you got a really big thick piece of rock, and you've got a really nice seal on top of it here. That's probably what.
Why don't they just pump it underneath the refinery?
I don't know I don't think the geology there is good enough, right? Yeah, I don't think they have that thick sandstone. So they might have some thickness, but if it's only 100 feet or something, right, or less, then, right, it's better to find a great big thick layer of it. That's what I'm guessing, right? Yeah, that they're after. Yeah.
So what do you know about the geography of that Illinois sandstone or that layer? Is it cover what parts of Indiana is it in, or is it all over the state? Or is it, continuous from Illinois?
It's
to
basically,
New York,
I don't know,
or what?
it kind of disappears, I think, as you go further to the north, right? But, no, it's huge, right? This is the whole basin crossing Illinois,
So it
and-
covers the whole state of Illinois?
Yeah, a
East
lot
to
of it,
west.
yeah, in the basin part, yeah.
And is it just northern, or is it cover the whole state, or what is it?
I think, well, I'm learning the geology here too myself, right? But yeah, I think it's pretty ubiquitous under a lot of Illinois and parts of Indiana that are in this basin, right?
So
if you
it
go
stops
further to the
somewhere in
east-
Indiana?
Yeah, it disappears, right, yeah.
So it goes up and down, I assume, as it moves across the land or underneath?
Yeah, it would have been, you know, for some reason, that part of the earth went down, and there was mountains, maybe early Appalachians and that, and sediments came down and just got deposited on that surface, right?
So if you start pumping it into property in Benton County, would it move over, you know, to the west? Does it tie into all of the rest of the basin? Or does it stop?
Yeah, I mean, in principle, right, but I mean, there's gonna be a limit to how much you put in and what the pressures are gonna be and how it can actually flow, right? So it'll flow until the pressure kind of dies down. But it's, in principle, you know, I suppose it could flow all the way there, right? But you know, there's only so much, right? And yeah, relative to the pore space, which is huge, that it's kind of, you know, small.
So is Benton County like the best place in the state, or is it?
I don't know.
I mean, it's what we
I think, you know, probably the counties to the north and to the south. And,
Okay.
yeah, so I'm not sure why Benton County. It could be that maybe there's that pipeline already existing, right, that runs through the county, that there's rights of way. Yeah, I don't know, right?
Doug, I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to make sure that I get Jeff time.
Okay,
Like,
sure.
how many more slides do you
Well,
have?
that's it, basically.
Jeff needs to leave at 11:30, so I want to get him in here to do.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I can, should I take one more then? And
Yeah, answer questions. I don't know
we
if
can
we need
answer
to kind of
questions later. We can
move back
talk
and forth
to.
between the two of you.
Okay, whatever, right? Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of questions. I don't want anybody to feel, right, that, so, should I?
Go ahead and answer.
Go ahead?
Go
Okay.
ahead and do it.
Okay, well, he was up there first.
I can answer some of these questions. It's not just Benton County, it's Newton, Benton,
Right.
Jasper, and White County that's being looked at.
They've been looking at, okay.
And what EP is telling us is that they're looking for voids in the earth, not these aquifers. They're looking for.
No, I think they need void space. Yeah, so I think, there's no voids, there's no caverns down there, right?
I'm just telling you.
Yeah, okay. They should probably check, yeah, so by voids, I think if it was a petroleum geologist or something, that's probably what they'd be meaning, that porosity, void space in the rock, right? Not big holes, yeah. So, yeah.
Is there any chance that could get involved with the T's, the T's aquifer?
Sorry?
Taze?
Taze? Well, that's what they want to avoid like crazy, right? So it's quite deep. There's rocks like this. The first one being the Eau Claire, which is impermeable, right? So, you know, if they put them down, they want it to stay there. So I think the odds of it leaking into the Taze are probably pretty low, unless there's some technical issue with the borehole or something, right? Yeah. So that would be where the humans have actually cut a hole down, right?
So it is a possibility that could be a problem.
Well, yeah, I don't, there's always a possibility, right? But those wells, for the CO2, they're really expensive. They make them put in stainless steel to avoid for corrosion, right? They're especially monitored. They have to do a lot of expensive things to make sure that they're in place properly, right? There's by the U.S. Department of Energy, right, has a special category for those injection wells. So those wells, those modern wells, are probably pretty low risk. Yeah. So.
What about the wells that were put in the county 7 years ago for oil exploration?
Sorry?
What about the old wells in Benton County?
Yeah, no, that's a problem, right? But I don't know that any of them went deep enough to cause a problem, right? They'd have to, and that has been a concern with old wells.
I've heard that they've gone 3,000 to 5,000 people.
Yeah, I don't know how, 35,000 feet.
3,000 to 5,000 people.
Oh, 3,000 to 5,000. Yeah, I don't know, right? So I don't know what's down there, right?
Being
So,
older wells, that's a concern.
yeah, no, that's a concern, right? So they may have to look at those, or they may want to avoid those areas entirely where they are, right? So, yeah. I just don't know about the old wells. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that the CO2 will go to a mineral after
Yeah.
how long, and what is the mineral, and is
Well, I think
it
it
safe at that
depends on,
point?
say, what the chemistry, probably hundreds of years, right? Or longer,
Hundreds,
yeah.
multiple hundreds.
And I think it depends on a lot of things, temperatures and what whether it's in the brines and all of that, right? Yeah.
And then it wouldn't be a concern for
No, it's basically a mineral, calcite, right, that is pretty, yeah.
So it hardens, right?
Yeah, it hardens into an actual mineral, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I just wanted to ask a question about the premise. I assume that we're doing this carbon capture on the idea that carbon dioxide is causing global temperature changes, and that this is a way for EP to play the financial and political game of offsetting their carbon dioxide output? Is that the game we're playing?
Well, I mean,
here?
that's, yeah, you wouldn't be doing it otherwise.
Okay, but it's well, this is the science part. So as long as China and India and far more populous countries aren't paying a whole lot of attention to how much carbon dioxide they're putting out, what difference is us stuffing it in sandstone that I'm
Well, I mean, again, I'm just a sucker. I don't want to touch, I just, yeah, so, that's politics, right, but, yeah.
It sounds more like to me, it's a money-making thing for BP that they can make green steel.
Well,
It's,
yeah, they can produce
yeah.
green hydrogen, or it's actually got a different color, but the thing is, then, it's seen, whatever they do with the hydrogen, because we use a lot of hydrogen already, right, for upgrading oil, for making plastics, blah, 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 but it could be that we start using hydrogen in, say, trucks, right, as a potential fuel. And steel, right, anything you had coal, you can probably do maybe even better with hydrogen, right, where, like steel making, or aspects of making concrete, right? Yeah. So of course they're in it for. I'm sure they're seeing their long-term where they're going and how the markets are going, right? So they're considering that for sure.
Yeah, I think we need to
Yeah,
shift
sorry.
over and have
I'll
we
be
need to get
around.
Jeff up here for a while,
Yeah.
and then I hope you can stick around
I'll
and
stick
answer more
around.
questions.
Yeah.
But I hate to cut you off, but I
No, no.
Jeff's got to leave at 11:30. I want to get in.
No problem here.
Well, that was good, good kind of introduction into the issue, because I'm not a scientist, but I am an attorney, and spent a lot of time working on this at the State House. And John may be able to pull up some slides that I shared with him. But what I want to do today, and I probably don't really need to go at length, but you have more questions for Doug that you'd be better suited for, is kind of explain almost a little bit about why you're dealing with this and how this came to be. And Farm Bureau's involvement. So let me start. Yeah, that's great. So this is not my presentation, but it is one that our members received on Friday. So for those that don't know Indiana Farm Bureau as well, we have internal policy advisory groups that advise us, people like me on our staff, on various subject matters. So Friday we heard from the Global CCS Institute, and I thought some of these slides might be useful to share with you today. In particular, because I'm not here to sell you on carbon sequestration, I just want to kind of give you, so Doug kind of talked about the sequestration component. I thought I would just show, here's where, this is the pipelines, existing CO2 pipelines in the United States, and so obviously we're talking about more coming in through Iowa, Illinois, potentially Indiana, but this is kind of the existing pipeline infrastructure for carbon sequestration. But you might find some value there. Here are a couple of projects that are being proposed. Right now they're having some debates, particularly in Iowa, on eminent domain use for the pipeline. As you can imagine, that's ticking some people off. And then I thought you might be interested in this guy. These are the operational facilities in North America. So just kind of wanted to share some of the factual data. Again, there's a little bit in there that's more pitch oriented. That's not why I'm here. So Farm Bureau got involved in this from a legislative standpoint because there were really two bills that were moving this past session in the legislature. One was from Wabash Valley Resources, which would, not to be confused with Wabash Valley Power, but would have created a legal pilot status for them for carbon sequestration and storage. So essentially, the bill they offered would have cut off your right to sue for nuisance or trespass if they stored CO2 under your property. So they applied for an EPA permit. The permit application showed that about 727 parcels would sit atop their CO2 storage unit. They would have had no obligation to notify landowners, no obligation to compensate landowners, and no obligation, and you would have had no recourse in court unless you suffered actual tangible damages. So that is to say if, I don't know, if the pipe exploded or if a wellhead exploded, I mean, if there was some accident that caused physical damage, you wouldn't be able to sue just for the existence of CO2 under your property. And so on the theory that, on the theory of the common law rule, the general common law rule, that you own everything from the heavens above to hell below, we argued that the pore space ought to be retained as an ownership right of the surface estate. So we argued to legislators that it ought to be owned by the surface estate as if you found oil, gas, or coal or something like that. Even though it's a sort of a porous, open cavity, we argued that's still your space. And there was some pushback on that, well, there's no value to it, it's empty space. And we said, well, there's value because you want it and we have it, so we're going to try to assign it some value. So the bill would have and they were going to manufacture hydrogen with an output of some ammonia, is my understanding, of course, this CO2, and then pump it down in West Terre Haute. So this would have been kind of south and west of here. And so we killed that bill, so that was good. We effectively killed that bill openly on third reading in the House. It had gotten through the Senate, so this was kind of the last-ditch effort on the House side to kill the bill. We were able to swap 13 votes with the help of our members and leadership and a lot of folks involved in the Farm Bureau to kill that bill. Simultaneously, House Enrolled Act 1209 was filed this past session. That was from BP and the Manufacturers Association. And they were kind of setting up a framework to allow CO2 storage to occur in the state. And we're sort of agnostic on the types of projects that are going on. So let me first say that. Because we've been involved with this bill, there is some misinformation that we have endorsed it. We haven't endorsed any project. What we have endorsed is any company that's willing to pay property owners for their pore space and negotiate with them for leases or sales of that pore space. And that's what 1209 did. So we negotiated with BP to have direct notification to all potentially affected parties, compensation for the pore space that you own, codification of that pore space as an ownership right. So in Indiana, and in many states still, it's kind of an unsettled question, who owns the pore space? And again, we operated on the theory, the general common law theory, that you owned it. But it wasn't in statute, and it hadn't been litigated. So we don't know exactly where a court might have come out. Now, I think there's pretty good money on them deciding that it would have been owned by you, but that was an unsettled policy question up to the point that we got 1209 passed. So we defined pore space, we codified it as an ownership right, there's direct notification to potentially affected parties, there's a consent threshold where there was none before in the bill that we got inserted, and there's compensation. And so some companies may choose that compensation structure differently. My understanding is it's going to be kind of a per ton per acre payment from BP. I don't know what amount, they've not disclosed that with us. I will share though that they've given us what I presume to be kind of the final draft of the contracts that they may be offering some of you. And we've had some meetings with some local attorneys that we use quite a bit. They're an agricultural law firm, Todd Jansen, Brianna Schrader. They've reviewed the contracts, or in the process of doing that. So as you get approached, we're trying to develop the resources that you might need to consult with an attorney if you want that contract under review. So we've at least got 2 attorneys that have reviewed this and can provide that service. We're looking to get more equipped to understand these contracts and how they operate, and what you should be thinking about, because none of us have been introduced to that heretofore. So we got involved in 1209 because we wanted those kind of the consent, the compensation, and the ownership right codified. Now, there's been some discussion that maybe the Wabash Valley Resources will come back and try to undo that, and perhaps they will. But we'll continue to fight that to make sure that this is an ownership right retained to you. Now the one, and some of you probably heard in the commissioners meeting that it's based on surface acres, so not number of people. So it's a 70% consent threshold that they have to meet. And then at that point, DNR can issue an order ordering in the other 30% of the ground to be unitized, what they call unitization. You may hear the term amalgamation. That may be what you see in your contract as a term amalgamation. It really means that they're looking at these sections of ground, and that will be the storage unit. And if they get 70% of the land of the acre owners to agree, DNR can order the other 30% in. And it effectually, functionally operates like eminent domain, although it is not that process. Procedurally, it is not. So it won't operate that same way. It'll be an order, but it still comes with compensation to that 30%. So we attempted to tailor it much like oil and gas, where there's a consent threshold that has to be met for the rest of the pool to be kind of amalgamated, is the term that they're using. Yes?
So, okay, go back to the amalgamation is if they've got 1,000 acres, they've got to get
700 consent,
and
yep.
30 if
they can still store under your property with compensation.
And is the compensation equal across all of them?
It is.
So who decides that?
They'll come up with it. The legislation didn't dictate a particular form or formula or function for how that'll work. So I presume that, BP will come up with a formula, and there may be others like ADM in Illinois that pays. Although I will say there are a lot of companies doing this on their own footprint. So that's part of why the fair market value of pore space also kind of remains an unsettled issue. ADM over in Illinois is sequestering CO2 under the surface, but my understanding is it's all on their owned property. We've got a couple ethanol facilities here in the state wanting to do it as well. My understanding it's all on their property or the property of their board members who have consented. So that's why the price, the fair market value of pore space is kind of an unsettled question. I saw a hand back there.
Yeah, I think they are.
Okay. Yes.
Are we gonna be forced into having to do this, or do we, the people, have a say-so on whether this is gonna happen or not?
The pore space right is yours. You own it, and that took effect in law in July. Now the question becomes, are you on that 70% that agrees as a landowner, or are you on that 30% that gets pooled in to create?
I understand that, but are they forcing us to do this?
Nobody can force you to sign the contract. It's like oil or gas. If you wanted to lease it out and sell it, you could. Nobody can force you into a contract. Yes?
I think the question he's getting at is, can the county officials do anything to stop this?
Gotcha, okay,
And
so.
the answer is no.
Well, the answer is I'm not sure. So there's a section of statute, there's a section in the home rule statute that when it gives counties their grant of authority, it's got this lengthy list of exemptions, or exceptions, I guess, where the counties do not have authority. So one is like express preemption, where maybe the legislature says, we are choosing not to give counties local authority as to X issue. Then there's implied preemption, where an example that we use often is, we don't want counties regulating, pesticides or fertilizers or feed, because Office of State Chemist does that. And they've got the scientists and the data to properly label and provide consumer protection and things like that. So the state chemist occupies that space and has preemption over local entities on feed, fertilizer, pesticides, things like that. Is this similar? I'm not sure. Again, some of this is unsettled, hasn't been litigated, and so I'm not sure what a court would say, but it's something that we're trying to gather some research into.
But there is no mention of county permits or zoning or plan commission BZA approval in that legislation.
Correct. It doesn't, the House Enrolled Act 1209 does not specifically grant any authority to counties to regulate these projects, nor does it specifically take it away. So if it's not there, it's probably in this implied preemption kind of exception to the home rule statute. And so I've got our general counsel's kind of looking into this. I've got another outside attorney, and we're just trying to gather the research, because it's not just going to be this county that wonders what they can do. There'll be others. See a hand over here.
They're already starting to do testing half a mile from my daughter's house, say that they bought that property, but I'm pretty sure it's the 20,000 property that they bought this last summer that my daughter wanted to buy. So say they do go ahead and drill there, and sometimes down the line, there's a leak and it gets in her groundwater. What rights does she have when it wasn't on her property?
I'm going to let Doug touch on this a little bit, because I can speak to only what the rules say, and that is that each of these projects has to have a permit from EPA under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so within that act, there's the underground injection control section, and that they have several classes of permits, 1 through 6. Class 2, for example, would be oil and gas. Then you've got others for manufacturing or pharmaceutical, chemical, things like that. This is a class 6 that has to be granted by EPA, and part of the terms of that is this groundwater protection and monitoring, because that is the statutory directive in the Safe Drinking Water Act to EPA, is to monitor and protect groundwater. So if there is an impact, they'll have to do remediation. Now, what are the details of that? Somebody asked me that at the commissioners meeting. I don't know exactly what remediation looks like, but there is a federal remediation requirement, the burden upon which is on the operator, so BP in this case, if that occurs. So, but I'm going to look into a little more of the details of what remediation looks like. I'll also add that when you're doing the project, they'll have monitoring wells kind of out where they think the plume will go. They'll have a monitoring well above it to see if anything does escape, and then they'll have another at the groundwater, drinking water level. So in that 300 to 500 foot 500 to 600 foot range, they'll have another monitor there, another about halfway down to the site of the injection, and then some on the perimeter. How many exactly? I don't know. Is it going to be encompassed? I don't think so, but they'll have to map where they think the CO2 will go in their permit application to EPA, and then they'll have to identify some sites for monitoring. Yeah.
Jeff, and again, I'm thankful to everybody being here because we want to hear all the information. And one of the information buzz out there is that BP will only be responsible for 20 years and then their hands are washed of it. Is that kosher?
So the terms of the contract, as I understand them right now, are going to be 20 years to start with maybe some additional options, 10 and 10 afterwards. So they think they can inject at least 20 years, but the monitoring and obligation, the monitoring obligation goes on for much longer than that. I think, well, first of all, it's monitored the entire time it's in operation. And then when they've decided they've injected all that they can, or they don't want to do anymore, maybe go to a different site, they've got to cap that well and shut down operations, and then the monitoring continues for some period of time. I think it's 50 years, so the EPA permit it goes on even after operations have ceased. So no, 20 years is just what, my understanding is just what they're offering in the contract for your pore space. They want to pump the CO2 to the pore space for at least that length of time and maybe more, but the monitoring goes on per EPA for much longer.
So the responsibility is not shed after 20
Correct,
years.
correct. And whether that's DNR that takes over responsibility, if BP maintains it, somebody has responsibility for that well, that injection site. Back here and then up here.
Yeah, we're barely qualifying for safe storage. So aren't there better places for them to pick than where we are? We are like right at the point of safe storage, 500 feet from being too shallow. 500 feet doesn't seem like a lot.
And I know Doug mentioned they're going down
Yeah.
2,500 to 3,500.
Yeah, at the shallowest is about 2,500 where this would be injected, and then deep, you know, it basically goes to 3,500 this way. So.
Yeah, out west was all the fracking, and then they had methane problems, then they have well water problems. I'm just really leery of doing this.
Yeah, no, it's understandable. I totally get that. To piggyback on Doug's answer, during the legislative session or the discussion on 1209, there was testimony that we're one of 3 spots with a major sort of geologic formation that would be suitable for this. The other 2 are kind of in the Dakotas and one at the Gulf. And the Indiana-Illinois line is another just really vast geologic formation that makes us, now, that's not to say you couldn't do it other places at a smaller scale, but at scale, you know, these millions of metric tons, we're one of 3, I think, that's available. I saw here, and I'll come back. Let's see right there.
BP has to have the landowner's permission to come on your property and do any testing and stuff, so is that correct?
Yeah, they won't be able to test on your
Or even
property,
the
or,
drill
yeah,
it.
they don't have any kind of special privileges to operate. They'll, yeah, I mean, if they want to do test wells, they've got to have, you know, the seismic is on the county roads and things like
Okay.
that, but yeah, they'll be approaching, and already are, I'm sure maybe some of you have talked to them, but they're approaching folks already, kind of with contract in hand, and would you agree to let us do some of the stuff?
So if you're in the 30% that's next to the 70% that wants to, can they come onto your 30% and drill a hole, a well, eminent domain, anything like that?
So you're asking if you don't consent, do they have surface access? Let me look into that question. I saw a hand way in the back.
I know DP is doing this to try to, the federal government has mandated, we talked about that, to decrease their emissions by 40%, and the projected time frame is like right now, you know, basically. So that's the deal, that's the big deal. So, you know, Whiting has the refinery up there, somebody mentioned maybe why aren't they just shooting it right under the ground in there, because you said that geologically it's not feasible. They don't have the type of environment that's needed, but my concern is, why is it not looked at, why they're not updating their plan to not emit it in the air in the first place?
Yeah, good question.
That to me is what they really need. I'm sure the cost, I guess you'd have to do cost analysis, I'm not a analyst, so, but that would be something that, you know, comparing apples here, you know, it seems like they're going through an awful lot of trouble to do this, so is there other things that they're looking
Well, I think part of the answer to your question is, in the Inflation Reduction Act, there was a tripling of the tax credits you can get for doing subsurface sequestration. I can't remember the exact number, but there were some credits available before, and they tripled in value. That was in the Inflation Reduction Act. In the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, I think I'm getting that close to right, from last year, there was $8 billion for hydrogen hubs, and the U.S. Department of Energy will be responsible for trying to set up these hydrogen manufacturing hubs around the state. So I think they want 4, so $2 billion apiece. So that's part of the answer is there's just a lot of new money out there for this.
Don't they have to have a pilot program and have that established before they can go any farther? I mean,
So I know the commissioners are considering that in part of their ordinance enhancements. The state law does not require that. So once you've notified, once you've got contracts, pore space under lease, done all those kinds of notice and due process pieces, you can operate. But I think and I've talked to the county attorney here. He's a law school friend of mine, and we just don't know whether that ordinance would hold up.
Who authorized the start for testing and everything before all of us knew anything about it?
I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but
I do.
I think seismic testing permits are local.
So it's coming from our county commissioners? Is that true?
I don't know the facts of that for sure. I don't want to say. So maybe somebody could ask them.
We need to find
I
out.
think those permits are local.
I was just gonna say, how can we get hold of those two attorneys? Do you have cards for them, or how do we get hold of them?
You can go through me to reach them. I'm happy to do that. Marissa Michael is our regional manager here. Of course, John has my contact information. Lana has my contact information. Whoever you want to go through to get to that, it's Todd Jansen, Brianna Schrader with Jansen Schrader Ag Law. And we had a very extensive meeting with them, our attorneys, and BP's attorneys, kind of running through the ringer with the contract if you want their review services. I see, yes,
What I
ma'am,
read,
you, sir.
it wasn't Governor Holcomb the one that okayed Indiana to be in this?
I guess, I don't know if directly, I mean, there was some interest in doing it prior to that. He has announced an interest in, kind of the hydrogen hubs. So I think he's interested in attracting some of that investment here, but no, he didn't have unilateral authority to say, yes, you may go operate. It would have been under well, first, EPA basically has threshold authority. If you don't have your Class 6 permit from EPA, you can't do this anywhere.
So my question is, I missed it, 70% of the landowners or 70% of the land area?
70% of the acres, yeah. So the owners of 70% of the acres agree.
So you only need one guy if he's farming 70% of the acres. Yes.
Can you also speak, and you and I talked about this, I know some people in here have gotten packets of information, but not everyone has been contacted like we thought maybe BP should have done.
Right.
And so, and it speaks to that question, like if there are some like Weaver Popcorn or the Mormons, I mean, there are some huge landowners who probably don't have any quote skin in the game because they don't live here. I mean, and there's no really recourse if they pick that. I mean, I'm sure BP can read a map of landowners just as easily as anybody else can. I mean, is that something that we need to worry about?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a tenant farmer, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of, you don't want that under the property you're operating on. Yeah, it's the same challenge that, we've talked about in some cases with wind and solar and, the absentee landlord maybe wanting to do those leases or things like that. It's a similar concern, so it'll require some conversations with tenants and owners for sure.
I'm thinking there's people like my daughter who only own 7 acres, but she don't farm it around her, so the guy who farms it around her has control of what happens in the 7 acres.
Whoever owns the ground.
Right.
It could not necessarily be the farmer, and that's the tricky part. You have to go get a flat price and see what's up with that.
So I thought I would just quickly go through a couple more slides. In fact, I do have something on the tax credits, so you can see some of the new funding that's coming out. So this is again to the why folks are interested. So there's varying levels here. I don't know exactly what each of these do, but these are, so this in particular, though, I can tell you is where Wabash Valley Resources down in West Terre Haute wants to operate. They'll have a facility that can do direct carbon capture out of the air. So they'll capture their hydrogen emissions too, but then they can do direct air capture. So that's part of what they want to do. And then the carbon, the credits are here. So for storage, this is what it jumped to for the direct air capture and point source injection. So just a little bit about some of the dollar figures behind that. But oh, and then I'll show you the. So these are the ones under development around the globe.
So you mentioned that the businesses get these credits. What about the state and what about local government? Do they get anything for this?
Right now, there's no provision for local government to capture any of the revenue. Although again, maybe there's an argument that they could do that in a zoning ordinance or something like that, or some kind of new regulatory ordinance. The state will get 8 cents per ton of CO2 captured. That was in 1209, because in the event that BP wants to hand this over to DNR, they'll have a fund to manage the operations, and staff to manage the operations and things like that. I think that was all you asked me, the state and the local.
Yeah.
Okay, well, oh, yes, sir.
Say I'm in a company, thinking about BP, I have all kinds of hazardous materials on hand. It costs me a fortune to get rid of. Looks like a convenient way to get rid of it cheaply.
So it could be. My understanding is for hazardous chemicals, those used to be under a class 4 EPA permit, and those no longer are issued.
What's the difference between eminent domain, you were discussing earlier, what the DNR can do? It sounds like it's basically one side of the coin or the other.
Yeah, I mean, functionally, the only difference is they won't go through an eminent domain proceeding. So once that 70% is hit, DNR can issue an order saying that the other 30% are required to be part of the storage unit, and BP is required to compensate those folks.
Have you read the contract?
I have not gotten through it all the way yet.
Okay. I was told there's an area in there that talks about how they can remove it and re-inject it, and then they don't pay the landowner any for that. But I think that means, like, I think that's when the danger is the most open for problems, is pulling it in and taking it out. Why would they do?
Can you do an extraction of it once it's down there?
Well, yeah, I don't think they want it to come out. When they do enhanced oil recovery, right, that CO2 is in with the oil, right, but that's part of the process, they strip that out. CO2 is actually.
I've read it, and it does say it in there, in one
Yeah.
section. I don't find out understand what I'm reading. It's a little concerning.
Yeah, I don't know why they'd want, I mean, they don't want it to come out, right, so.
Well, it says that
yeah.
it can be, removed and re-injected in
Okay.
one section.
I suppose, the only thing I could think of, suppose a market for, because it's gonna be not the best quality of CO2, you don't wanna put that in beer or make bread with, right, at that point. So, it could be, suppose somebody found an oil field and they wanted to inject CO2 and, use it for something like that. That's, otherwise, yeah, I'm not sure why they'd even say that, yeah.
So the other, oh yeah.
Couple things. So one, I wanted to, I guess, point out that the slides are handy. I like that. The Global CCS Institute their mission is to accelerate the deployment
Correct.
of carbon capture and storage. So they're not investigating it, they're wanting to push it forward.
Right, so I don't want to, there's some
I know
pitch
we're not
slides in there that I don't want to pitch you on anything, but yeah, that's right.
And I'd like to ask you a question I asked you earlier this morning.
Mhm.
So they'll have an injection site, and that will spread for probably miles and miles, probably hundreds of square miles. And during that and after it's done, you mentioned that there will be points of observation for groundwater, well water. And I know we've already had this, but
yeah.
How many of those points will there be, given that it's going to cover hundreds of square miles? Having a point in one location doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay in other locations.
No, you're right. So I have I've jotted that down to follow up with BP to find out. And I should clarify that the monitoring wells are the same depth as the injection wells. So this, whether it's 2,500, 3,500, whatever level they're going down to do the actual injection, the initial set of monitoring wells are at that same depth. Then there might be a one that's, let's call it 1,000 feet to see if anything's rising to the surface, if there's any vertical movement, and then another that 300 to 500 foot level for groundwater. But I don't know exactly how many. I don't know exactly the totality of the perimeter and if they will have those at all points, but I can find that out. And I say that we've had a pretty vigorous dialogue with BP on this. They've come in and met with us on a few occasions. So I'm going to be very deliberate about getting these questions answered and getting something back to you with some answers on that. So this is maybe not my last appearance here. If you want me back, we'll come and talk about this again because BP has invited us to help them answer the questions you have. And again, I want to stress we've not endorsed a particular process or project, but they have given us a pathway and an open dialogue line to get your questions answered. Here in the back there.
How do they know when they get to the 70%? If they get one.
So I'm going to guess that has to do with the seismic testing and the volume they want to inject into, and then identifying who sits above that volume as a surface owner, and then kind of doing a measurement that way. But I don't know exactly how they'll find that out. I would assume it has to do with the volume of the pore space they want to inject into, and then finding the owners that sit atop it.
Can they tunnel into your property from a different location without your consent or knowledge?
I'm not aware that they're going to do any horizontal drilling. I know that can go on in some places with fracking and oil recovery, but I'm not aware that they're going to do that. I would guess you know what, I don't want to, let me just write it down. I won't venture a guess.
What happens if we just all reject this idea?
Yeah, they have to have consent. I mean, they have to have that 70% threshold. And
Do we get to vote on it or something, or?
You just turn away the lease, you just deny the lease.
Yeah, but I mean, what if I'm not a ground owner?
Sure.
1,000 acres. Do I have any say in I don't want this to get into my town's well or water system? Or can we reject this whole deal?
I think
or
that
are they
comes.
gonna force it down our throat?
I think that comes down to the legality of the additional requirements that your commissioners are considering in their ordinance. And we just don't know the answer to that question, so we're trying to get some research on that. Look at some similar types of industries where counties have in the past tried to regulate beyond zoning, so landfills, confined feeding operations. There's case law out there, so it's not a direct comparison because this hasn't been litigated, but maybe we can draw some analogies to some other industries that have tried this. So that's a really long-winded way to say I just really don't know, because I don't know if the zoning ordinance would uphold that your commissioners will put in those extra requirements that'll make it more difficult for them to be here. But at a very basic level, it's kind of like the way the commissioners talk today. Talk about yourselves, talk as a community, and talk to the landowners if they're not all absentee, and see if you can figure this out. Because ultimately nobody can force the leases to be signed or the contracts agreed to if the community doesn't want to.
Well, our commissioners have evidently known about this for quite some time now, and nobody else did.
I don't know when they were first approached by BP.
Nobody does.
This entire discussion has been focusing on these wells. Nobody has touched on the hundreds of miles of high-pressure pipeline that it's going to take to transport this throughout these multiple counties. And that may affect your land even though a well may not.
Sure, yeah, no, it's a good point. I think at least for now, they're talking about using existing pipeline infrastructure, existing easements, but that may not be the case forever. Yes?
How's it gonna affect the, like that testing side, if they do it a half a mile from Oxford, and the people in Oxford get affected at some point, what rights are they gonna have? If they're not the people that own the ground that it was done on.
The seismic testing.
If there's any leakage that gets into the town water or anything, what rights are they gonna have? opt out or opt in.
Right. Yeah, I can talk to him about that. Yes, in the back.
I was over at the commissioners meeting this morning, and I did bring up the point that a lot of people might not be thinking about, and that is property value. When a project like this goes in, there's always risk, always. You have to be willing to take it if that's your choice, I guess. But then there's also future risk down the road. We're looking at 1 generation, 2, maybe 3 years. But what about down the road in the future? You have to look out for that. I was talking about property value, what the potential implications could be for a project of this nature. This is huge. This is a big deal. Everybody needs to keep that in mind. If you're being considered or approached or monitored in any way or solicited by the oil, what the future holds in this type of a project. There's a lot of generational landowners here that maybe want to be able to pass this land down the road to their families, grandson, granddaughter, or whatever. If there's a big incident and our values go way down in property value, and it may, just people might not want to take the risk to live here knowing that that's there. So there's a lot of what ifs involved that you really have to consider and make sure you're really taking that apart.
Yeah, okay, so if you want to build in Benton County, and there's a windmill in your vicinity, that kind of kiboshes what you can and can't do. Do the windmills have any sort of kiboshing as far as this ground drilling? I mean, because of the set aside and the, you know what I'm talking?
In other words, is there any impact on their operation or?
Yeah, I mean, you can't build so far by windmill. I mean, does it mean you can't do anything so far, or can you? Does the drilling have any effect on that?
I'll find out.
I know. It's the same family tree. I just didn't know.
Yeah.
With the conversation around the monitoring and water testing and, who is responsible for that? BP or the third party? Not to sound conspiracy theorist, but wouldn't
Who's
necessarily
watching the
trust, right?
Yeah, so BP is responsible to conduct the monitoring. EPA's, they're responsible for reporting that as well to EPA. So EPA will ensure that that is active and ongoing for the life of the project, and then up until the migration of the CO2 stops.
But who actually performs, say, the water testing?
Yeah, I would need to find, I mean, I know BP bears the burden of responsibility for remediation if there's an impact on groundwater. I don't know to what level they're actively testing wells. They'll monitor to see if there's CO2 getting into the groundwater, but I don't know if that involves active or ongoing testing, but I can find out.
When they're done with the seismic testing, they have to.
I just want to know
disclose
who is doing the
results to
testing. I
DNR.
wouldn't want it BP to be the one
Sure,
doing the testing.
sure.
That-
Understood.
Is there any EPA or a DNR oversight to check these plans?
Yeah, I don't know that EPA does the groundwater testing themselves. DNR wouldn't, because the enforcement of the permit is EPA. They have primacy over it. DNR has primacy over oil and gas wells here in the state, but no other Safe Drinking Water Act permit. So the enforcement component for sure is EPA. I just don't know to what level or how often they're testing groundwater, if at all. But I can find out.
So can the testing be audited?
I'll find out. Sorry, you were.
Since they're doing the seismic testing currently, when they're done with that, are those results sent to the DNR? Does the local government even have an option to have those for review, send out to the public? Is the DNR and EPA the ones that approve based on the geology? I think that's important. So we're just now doing the testing phase. Where does that data go to make the determination whether they can even proceed with the project based on whatever standards allow the hospital 12 and 1?
Yeah, I don't think they'll have to, they'll likely report it to EPA, which may mean it's something that you can, Freedom of Information request, get access to, but I'll find that out for sure.
Can BP already use their existing easements for the windmill contracts?
they did mention using existing easements. They did not say whether it would be on their wind farm, so I don't know exactly if that's what they were referring to.
Because essentially that'd be 70% of a lot of areas.
It's messed up.
Yes, sir.
On the 70% threshold, BP presented that 9 square miles was kind of an ideal pumping unit. Could the county be a hodgepodge of 9 square miles that covered, say, 50% of the county area, and you would calculate the 70% of those pumping units? Or
Yeah,
is
so-
it the county?
They do want to, I mean, they mentioned to us, they want to do, sections and lock in, around 6,000 acres worth of sections in a grid-like fashion if they can do it. They would, I mean, so are you asking if?
So is it 70% of like the entire county, for instance? Or is it 70% of the area they've locked in, which could be little
Right.
blocks here and there?
And and this may be more of a movement geology question, but I don't think they'll have patches. Now, they may have, a set of 9 sections here and a set of 9 sections here and pump below, but I don't think it would get much smaller than that, because again, this is gonna be a continuous flow of CO2, and so they'll need the land above it to be contiguous as well. So they, in theory, I think if I understand your question, I think they could have different sections around the county, but wherever they're pumping, they'll want the acreage that locked up or leased or, yeah, within a continuous segment, whatever size. So, okay. Well, I appreciate you listening to me pontificate. I've jotted your questions down. I know you probably have more that'll be generated after today, but Farm Bureau will be here as a service to try to get legal, educational, informational resources to you, along with Purdue Extension and their professors are working on this issue. So lots more to come. We just don't have all the answers today, and so I know there's a lot of lingering concern, but we'll try to relay as much back as we can once we do some more information gathering.
I know I shut you off, Doug.
That's okay.
Did you have more slides, or
No,
stick around and answer questions? I know Jeff has to leave, but I want to thank all of you for coming, and I think Doug will stick around a little bit longer. I think Jeff needs to leave, but I wanted to mention that our local Farm Bureau was involved in putting this meeting on. Lan has been a little part of getting this done, getting it advertised. She basically told me I needed to do it. That was part of it, like somebody kind of had to shake me. You need to do this, you need to get on this, so appreciate that.
We will try to put more information on the farm, and you don't have to be a Farm Bureau member to get on the Farm Bureau Facebook page, but I'll try to share information as we get it. And it's the best way for me to disseminate information is to put it on the Facebook page, I guess.
And we'll see if we got a good recording of this, and we'll try to get that out there at a good site where people can access it, and you can tell other people about this meeting, let them sit through it. And I know that some of the things that have come up have been kind of people upset with the commissioners, but I think, in my opinion, if the commissioners would have told BP, get the hell out and you can't do the testing, I think they would have found out that they don't have that power. That's my
the reason
guess.
why they're already bypassed.
What's that?
That's why they've already been bypassed.
The commissioners?
Yeah.
I don't know if they, they talked to BP. Once
Well, I'm
BP
just
started
saying
doing that
early on,
testing.
They got, basically, they approved that state house before our commissioners could do it.
Yeah, right, they didn't start at the county level. They started at the national and state.
Commissioners had no say.
Yeah.
So who approved the permits that for BP to come in here? Was it the commissioners or the council or?
I don't know.
Land?
I didn't know. I never even asked that question about permits to come in and do the testing, but I don't even know if that's a county thing for sure. But I do know, I guess I just wanted to stick up for our commissioners. I don't want you guys going with pitchforks and getting in somebody's yard, because I've been talking to them. I know they knew about this in the middle of October. It's the first, they just found out about this. We were at that wind or solar power thing down there at the beef house, and they had just they just found out about this, and they were Brian was trying to figure out what he needs to do, you know, what is this, and so that was probably mid-October, I would guess. And I know November 1st is when Doug, you came to a commissioner meeting and talked to them.
Yeah,
It was
a few weeks ago.
the first November meeting. And what we've tried to do at the Advisory Plan Commission and BZA is set out an ordinance for the county to try to make it our rules a little more stringent than the state rules. And the question's gonna be, I mean, will that stand up to a legal fight? And we tried to put in there, I mean, the question was asked, can we make it so instead of 70% of the land being under contract, make it 90% or 95 or 99? We don't think we can make it 100. I don't think that kind of attorneys have been telling us, you know, at some point, you can't make it, for some reason we can't do it 100, we gotta have everybody. And I know that it may seem kind of unfair that people who own more land have more say. I only own 1.5 acres, but I'm fine with the electoral process, which favors me in a sparsely populated state. I mean, I have a little more say than somebody who lives in a largely populated state does. Electoral college, it works out good for me there.
This county's had the wool pulled over its eyes more than once in the last few years, and it's getting old.
So we're also trying to, the question came up, can we make it so only people that own land in the county, the absentee owners don't have, they're not a part of this, you know? We don't want the absentee owners that live in California or Washington State to have a say in this. Can we just have it be people who live here? And we're told pretty clearly no. Like, this is, I like the Constitution when I like the Constitution. This is something that probably wouldn't hold up to a legal.
But there are a lot of other people who live in Benton County who are not legal.
Right.
And they're not.
Yeah. People who live in towns aren't gonna have much say at all, because the town's footprint might be.
They're drinking the water.
Yeah, and I only own 1.5 acres, but I have a well, and there's 4 of us drinking out of that well. I mean.
So how do we stop it?
I think to stop it, just nobody signs a contract.
Yeah, but before that happens, how do we stop this whole project?
Man, I don't know. I don't know.
I don't think you can go backwards. I think we're gonna have to, you can't go back and rewind.
Well, we've got a mid-election coming up.
But you know, again, it's a free country, so people always have opportunity. It seems like, as a farmer, it seems like the sky always seems to fall right in the middle of the field. Landing or harvesting. So, you know, then you're on a scramble, but we've scrambled as much. We've got some great resources. I think we have opportunities. We just, it's very hard to not take it personally that we've been hoodwinked or whatever, but again, I know that Benton County does want to be progressive. We farm and that's what we do, but we also want to be a progressive county and not.
Well, our farmers have got windmills, but they also got 1 million miles of tile under them now.
That's not a problem.
Yeah, I've been driving over that. It's kind of bumpy up there, but I get that.
This could be more work for you, Danny.
That's not a problem.
Danny, yeah, talk it in.
If you want, the first place to stop this is to contact your legislators and put local decisions in that legislation that was passed earlier this year. That's where it has to start, is to get the legislature to amend that law to allow the local jurisdictions to have some authority, because right now, we don't.
I believe Rick Niemeyer is against us.
You voted against 1209.
And we have, we have a representative from Jim Baird here. Does Mr. Baird have any?
I'm Congressman Baird. I'm here mainly to gather information. A lot, the EPA stuff, a lot of that does come from the federal government. And we also have Mark with Senator Braun's office too. But this is state, this legislation they're talking about is a state law. So to contact your state legislators would be the best at this time. But I'm gathering information to find out more.
And that's Rick and Sharon. Rick Niemeyer, Sharon. Thank you.
I think they need to read House Bill 1209. Look that bill up and read it. And I know some of it's very hard to understand. I have the same problem. But I think we all need to look at that, see what
And just know that 1209, before it was born, we didn't have, they were just gonna come in and do whatever they wanted to do. So I know that Jeff put a lot of time into that to at least give us some anchor to hold off on. I mean, and that's kind of what the legislators and what Farm Bureau is trying to do, is have as much rights with farmers as we can. But again, at a national level, we do lose a little bit of foothold that we're trying to keep.
Yeah, it's not a perfect statute by any stretch, but it did basically set up the framework that they have to come to you on an individual basis to get this project started. If they can't lock up the acres with leases or sales, they can't operate. And so prior to the bill passing, that wasn't the case.
So, yeah, I was just gonna add that in terms of if you're interested in, well, I know that as early as next week, BP is set up with landowners to begin meeting, and I'm not certain of the full context of the meeting, if it's to sign contracts or not, but I know that as early as next week, or it is happening if it's not already happening. So one thing you can do is talk to your neighbors, and just have the discussion and spread the discussion. So.
Can you post the slide decks wherever you post the video?
Is that something you're okay with?
Yeah, I'm fine, sure.
Yep,
I can get those to you.
Jeff gave me 6 cards. They're $20 each. But and again, I
My info's on the Farmer website as well. Our homepage.
Yes.
I
get the more we swap, I mean, at least the more they know that we're not happy or concerned. That's good.
Thank you all for your time and attention. I'll happily come back to talk about this in the future. Thanks a lot.
That's still here, you guys got theological questions? I should have brought the rocks that I'm trying to identify. I've got a few that I can identify.
Ready?
That's a good question.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.